Python function, one of the most important topics of our Python series. So in this section, we will be exploring how Python functions work and how can we use the Python function in our code so we can minimize our code and we can reusable our code and make our code more scalable and maintainable in the future. So basically the functions, its name also denote that it is doing some particular stuff. Function means a work which need to be done. So a function is a block of code with which only runs when it is called. So it will not run when it is not being called. Like if you want to call any function, you have built it like run the machine to print some pages. So if you don't call the function run the machine, it will never be execute what it inside the function. So this is the logic behind how function works. A function can return data as a result. So you have to keep in mind that every time you are running a function, it will return a data. Like if you are running a machine to be run, so what it's giving the data, it's actually uh, doing the work. Like it's saying that printing the stuff or giving the printed stuff on the front as a data for the result. So a function helps avoiding code repetition. So if you have the same line of code in many lines of your code base, like in starting lines you have some similar code, and in the ending you also repeating the whole code again and again and again. As much as time you need the whole group of code which is repetitive in code base, you can make a function for that, and it will be uh, dynamic, and whenever you call the one line function, it will execute the whole of the stuff you have written in the function. So this is how it's work and it is useful, that's why. So let's create a function. So in Python, a function is defined using def. So whenever you are declaring a function, you have to put def before the variable. And here we are not calling the variable, we are calling the function. So you have to keep in mind now we are going beyond the variable stuff. So we are not just having a variable which contains some values to execute, but we have a function now which will contain a code block of code, and it will run and it will give some output. So I have declared a function. uh, it is up to you what you want to give it a name. Like if I want to give it a name of fun, so you can do that also. You can remove this, you can give any name you want as you have given to the variable. So the naming will be doesn't having any issue with that, but you have to keep in mind for the naming convention, the rules we have follow for the variables you should also follow for the declaration of your function. So for declaring a function we use def, and the variable of the name of the function is up to you. So whatever you want to do, give it, but you have to put the uh, small brackets after the your where function name, so it will indicate that you have a function, not a variable. And after that you have the colon which will start your function body. So it is actually the body of the function. So you have to also put the intent exactly as we have done in our if and else statements. So what if we run this? So as we have discussed that function will only execute when we call the function name. If we don't call the function name, it will not execute. So here we can see that here is nothing output. So for getting that, if we run fun, our function name is my fun, and if I give this, now it's called name. It is called a calling a function. So this is mean you are calling a function. So as many time you use the calling function, this the whole code base will run at that time. So you don't need to write all of this stuff again and again to get the same output. Like if you do that, you should do the same like this. If you do this, it will doesn't have any output because we have to call it. So for calling a function, we required this kind of keyword too. So we can call the function. Just write the function name and put the small colon, small brackets, and it will, yeah, ready to execute. And as many time you call the function, the whole function will execute that amount of time. So keep in mind that it is really practical and dynamic stuff. So whenever we use this, it will really helpful for concising our code base and making uh, less repetitive code in our full code base. So this is why we prefer to use function instead of copy pasting the whole logics again and again. So this create a function name, my function, that prints hello from a function when called. So you can see that then we have done it and we have called it again and again. And what this does, uh, the amount of calling increases, the execution also increases at that same amount. So the code inside the function must be indented. We have discussed that if we have used it in conditionals where we have put indent before the body of the if and else statements. So you have to keep in mind how to put the indent. However, we are discussing how these things work, and it will be more easy for us. So Python uses indentation to define code blocks. Calling a function, to call a function, write its name followed by parentheses. So let's do, we already have did it. You know that we just call the function and it is executing the whole function. It's really useful when we have multiple stuff in our single function. So you have three prints in single function. If you run this, then this function will execute it, and the three output you will get. So if you increase the amount of calling, like we have two calling, then we will be having six output. So each time it's run, it will outputting three prints. So you can see that how it is important for us so we can reduce our line of code. You can call the same function multiple times. We have did that and we have learned it. So let's move on. Functions name. So how to give a function name? Function names follow the same rules as variable name as we have discussed earlier. And a function name must start with a letter or underscore. A function name can only contain letter, numbers, or underscore. Function names are case sensitive. My function and my function are different, as we have in our variables naming section, where we have discussed that if you have a different capitalized and lower alphabets, it will different variables. So however, if we look that, we we will see that it is same word, my function, but their alphabetical capitalization and lower makes it totally different variable. So, for example, uh, valid function of if we put any uh, dash between two names to merge it to become a function name, we can do that. And if we put this hyphen uh, before the variable name, it's also work. And if we give camel casing, you can also do that. So it's up to you what kind of variable naming you will use. So having understanding of how to give a variable name or function name is useful, but you have to always follow the rules and regulation what your company or what your software is already following. So you have to keep in mind that also. It is a good practice to use descriptive names that explain what the function does. So yeah, it's basically the whole point of view is that. So if here we are printing a stuff, so our function name should be my print font. So what it does mean, it is become more understandable. So we are telling to ourselves, or if anybody see it, they will understand that this function contains some print work. So why use functions? Imagine you need to convert temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius several times in your program. Without a function, you would have to write the same calculation code repeatedly. So if you do that, you can see that uh, if we need the calculation stuff, so we are declaring the variable, we are calculating the variable result, and we are printing the stuff. So this is totally uh, repetitive. So instead of that, we can do something else. We can create a function which will take this stuff. So it is exactly similar to this, but it is more concise and useful. And we doesn't need to write the function, repetitive function data again and again, but it will still have the same result. So how does it work? So we have declare a function, and for declaring a function, we use the keyword def, and we are giving the function name, meaningful name, in which we are telling that this is Fahrenheit to Celsius, and we doesn't need to put the uh, function keyword because it already we are going to understand it is a function, and we are giving a Fahrenheit. So the Fahrenheit is coming from here, so our code is now more dynamic and data is coming from directly from the input side. So it can be a dynamic also. User can put the data. If we use here the input keyword and stuff. But if we have some data and we just need to call the function and put the amount of Fahrenheit, and it will automatically calculate the stuff. So we doesn't require to do this kind of calculation and again. And if we need new one, new calculation or new temperature status, we need to write the stuff again. So in this scenario, we just need to copy this and paste it here and just give it a value of 10 and it will calculate the whole stuff. Here, it is that simple. So yeah, this is makes our code more easy to understand, dynamic, scalable, maintainable, and understandable for others. Return values. Function can send back data to the code that calls them using the return statement. When a function reaches a return statement, it stops executing and sends the result back. What does that mean? So here we can understood that if we have this kind of stuff and if we want to make it fully dependent on, here is also happening that returning stuff means the calculation is automatically going towards this and it is printing the stuff. So yeah, it's this actually this whole function is giving a return. So the whole meaning is that. So if we copy this and paste it here, then we have a function which will be returning a hello from a function. This is a string, and we have a variable which is containing the function. And when we call the variable to be printed, it's getting actually a result. So this is how a function return a data. And if we move forward, you can use the return value directly. So where we can use that, if we doesn't need to write this whole stuff, we can just copy this whole variable or function name. Instead of the new variable, we just have to put it here. So this function is actually returning a stuff. So when we print this stuff, then the return stuff will be printed on our screen, which is hello from a function. So if we go beyond this, if a function does not have a return statement, it returns none by default. So the pass statement function definition cannot be empty. If you need to create a function, placeholder without any code, use the pass statement. So if you doesn't have any stuff in your function, and if you still calling it to for printing out on the screen, it will show an error. So instead of that, you just need to put pass, which will pass the whole function, and it will doesn't show any result. Instead, it will be telling us it's none, means there is nothing to be shown. So the pass statement is often used when developing, allowing you to define the structure first and implementing detail later. So here is an exercise. What is the correct keyword for defining function in Python? We use def to declare any function. So let's move on towards the next section, which is our arguments.